The first time Wang Yibo noticed Xiao Zhan, it wasn't during the audition cameras or under the bright lights that swallowed everyone whole. It was in the quiet in-between moment, when the room exhaled, when scripts lay forgotten on laps, and when people were most themselves. Xiao Zhan was laughing. Not the polite laugh actors perfected, but the kind that escaped him, soft and warm, like he'd forgotten for a second that the world was watching. Yibo, leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed, felt something shift. He didn't know what it was yet, only that something had moved. They were strangers then. 2 names on a casting list. 2 lives running parallel lines, never meant to cross, until suddenly they did. The first rehearsal was awkward in the way beginnings always are. Cameras hadn't rolled yet, but the pressure was already there. Everyone wanted to prove something. Everyone wanted to be unforgettable. Yibo barely spoke. He never did when he didn't need to. Xiao Zhan, on the other hand, filled the space naturally, not loudly, but gently, asking questions, checking in, smiling at people like he genuinely cared. When they were paired together for a scene read, the room went quiet. It was supposed to be simple. Just lines, just movement. But something happened. Their eyes met, just briefly, and the air changed. It was subtle, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were standing close enough to feel it. The words flowed easier than expected. The pauses landed perfectly. When Yibo spoke, Xiao Zhan listened like the words mattered. When Xiao Zhan responded, Yibo didn't rush him. By the time the scene ended, no one said cut. The director blinked first. From that moment on, everything shifted. Filming days turned into long nights. Long nights turned into shared exhaustion, inside jokes whispered behind cameras, silent understanding during retakes that never seemed to end. Somewhere between scripted lines and unscripted moments, something real began to grow. They learned each other's rhythms. Yibo noticed how Xiao Zhan rubbed his thumb against his knuckle when he was nervous. Xiao Zhan noticed how Yibo's shoulders tensed when he was frustrated, how he relaxed only when he thought no one was looking. During breaks, they'd sit side by side, not always talking, but never uncomfortable. Silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. One rainy night, filming ran late. The set lights reflected off wet pavement, turning everything into a blur of gold and silver. The crew packed up quickly, eager to escape the cold. Xiao Zhan forgot his umbrella. Yibo noticed. Without a word, he stepped closer, lifted his own umbrella, and held it over both of them. They walked slowly, shoulders brushing, rain tapping softly above them. "Thanks," Xiao Zhan said quietly. Yibo nodded. That was it. But somehow it was everything. The internet noticed before they did. Fans dissected every glance, every smile that lingered half a second too long. They wrote theories, made edits, slowed videos down frame by frame, searching for proof of something unnamed but deeply felt. Just co-stars, interviews said. But the truth lived in moments cameras never captured. Like the time Xiao Zhan struggled with a difficult scene, frustration shadowing his usually bright eyes. Yibo didn't say anything. He just stood beside him, steady and calm, grounding him without trying to fix him. Or the night Yibo sat alone, helmet beside him, thoughts heavy, when Xiao Zhan appeared with 2 cups of coffee and no questions. They became each other's safe place. Fame grew louder. Expectations heavier. Every move scrutinized, every interaction analyzed. The world wanted a story, a label, something to consume. They gave the world professionalism. They kept the rest for themselves. There were moments when the weight almost crushed them, when schedules pulled them in opposite directions, when rumors twisted reality into something unrecognizable. One argument came late, fueled by exhaustion and unspoken fears. "You don't talk," Xiao Zhan said, voice tight. "You just disappear." Yibo clenched his jaw. "And you smile like everything's fine when it's not." Silence fell between them, thick and painful. Then Xiao Zhan sighed, softer now. "I just don't want to lose this." Yibo looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time the words escaped. "You won't." Not a promise made lightly, not a dramatic confession, just truth. Time passed. The project ended. The final scene wrapped. Applause echoed across the set as flowers were handed out, photos taken, goodbyes said. People assumed that was the end. They were wrong. Even apart, they stayed connected. Messages sent at odd hours. Short calls that lasted longer than intended. Support offered quietly when headlines turned cruel. They grew, individually and together. Years later, they stood on the same stage again, older, steadier, eyes carrying stories no script ever could. When they looked at each other, the audience felt it, that same spark, deeper now, quieter, unbreakable. Not something loud, something lasting. They had become more than just co-stars. They were witnesses to each other's lives, keepers of each other's truths. Two stars who found alignment not in the sky, but in shared moments, shared silence, shared strength. And in a world that demanded explanations, they chose something braver. They chose to just be. Together, whether side by side or miles apart, their connection remained, unspoken yet undeniable, written not in headlines, but in the spaces between words. Some bonds don't need names. They just need time. And theirs had already proven it could outlast anything. Before the cameras learned their angles, before the crew memorized their names, before the world decided who they were supposed to be, there were only two young men standing on unfamiliar ground, pretending not to feel the pull of something neither had planned for. Wang Yibo arrived early every morning. Always early. He liked the stillness before the set came alive, the few moments where the world felt manageable. On one of those mornings, he noticed Zhan already there, sitting on the edge of the set stairs, script resting loosely in his hands. Zhan looked up and smiled, sunlight catching in his eyes. "Morning," he said. Yibo nodded, but something about that moment lingered longer than it should have. From that day on, mornings became shared territory. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. Yet every silence felt intentional, like a conversation spoken without words. Their first costume fitting together felt unreal. Layers of fabric, unfamiliar identities being stitched onto their skin. When Zhan stepped out, transformed, Yibo's breath caught. Not because of how he looked, but because of how easily he seemed to carry another soul inside him. "You okay?" Zhan asked, noticing Yibo staring. "Yeah," Yibo replied quickly, looking away. But the truth was, something had already changed. During early rehearsals, the director kept adjusting their positions, closer, then closer still. Each time their hands brushed, electricity sparked, subtle but undeniable. They learned to hide it, to turn it into something the cameras could use without revealing how real it felt. But there were moments no camera could catch. Like the time Zhan stumbled over his lines after a long night of filming. The room grew tense. Yibo stepped forward without thinking, placed a hand lightly on Zhan's shoulder, grounding him. "Take your time," Yibo said softly. Zhan met his eyes, something unspoken passing between them, and nodded. The scene that followed was flawless. Crew members whispered afterward, stunned by the chemistry, calling it natural talent. They didn't know it wasn't talent. It was trust, forming faster than either of them could control. One afternoon, during a break, Zhan found Yibo sitting alone, helmet resting beside him, eyes distant. "You always disappear like this," Zhan teased gently, sitting next to him. Yibo shrugged. "Noise gets loud." Zhan smiled, understanding more than Yibo expected. "Then we'll sit quietly." And they did. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the set, while two futures unknowingly aligned. As days passed, they became mirrors. Zhan brought warmth where Yibo carried calm. Yibo brought steadiness where Zhan carried emotion. Together, they balanced something fragile and rare. Then came the night shoot. Cold air. Artificial snow falling endlessly. The scene demanded heartbreak, separation, longing. Zhan struggled, emotion choking his voice. The director called for a pause. Zhan turned away, breath shaky. Yibo followed. "You don't have to force it," Yibo said quietly. "But it has to feel real," Zhan replied, frustration sharp. Yibo stepped closer. "It already is." Zhan looked at him then, really looked, and something in his expression softened. The next take left the entire set in silence, tears blurring more than just the camera lens. That night, after filming wrapped, they stayed behind. Fake snow melting around their feet, reality slowly returning. "I don't know why this feels different," Zhan admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Yibo didn't answer immediately. He rarely rushed truth. "Maybe," he said finally. Some connections don't wait for permission. Xiao Zhan smiled, sad, grateful, knowing. From that point on, the world began watching more closely. Fans noticed how Yibo always stood slightly nearer to Xiao Zhan during interviews. How Xiao Zhan's laughter softened when Yibo spoke. How their eyes searched for each other in crowded rooms. But what fans never saw were the late-night messages, "Did you eat? Get some rest?" Or the quiet reassurance before difficult scenes. Or the way Yibo instinctively reached for Xiao Zhan's sleeve when anxiety crept in. This wasn't something loud. It was something growing roots. They were still learning each other, still discovering how deeply presence could matter. Neither dared name it. Naming it felt like risking it. So they didn't. They just showed up. Again and again. And in that fragile, powerful beginning, before fame complicated everything, before the world demanded explanations, they became something rare. Not just co-stars, but two souls finding home in the same moment of time. And that was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story and want part 2 with even deeper emotions, higher stakes, and unforgettable moments, please like this video, share it with fellow fans, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories like this.